Hi, I'm Kaylee, and today I'm going to tell you about all the books that I read in October. October was a great reading month because, of course, I was participating in Victober and reading Victorian classics, and I really enjoyed that. But other than that, I didn't do a lot of reading. I guess I was just really focused on these big, long Victorian classics, and it just didn't leave a lot of time for other stuff. But that is okay. It's not about the numbers. It's about how much you enjoyed your reading, and I really enjoyed my reading in October. Before we dive in, we're going to reach back here to the Booktuber Shoutout book, and we'll shout out somebody randomly. Today's shout out goes to Brunette Bibliophile. I will leave a link to their channel in the description. Be sure to go over and subscribe to them. Please do subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and follow me over on Goodreads and Instagram and all the places. In October, I read 4 classics. I read 3 children's picture books. I read 2 middle grade, 1 fantasy, and 1 sci-fi. So first, let's talk about the classics that I read. The 2 big classics that I read for Victober were North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell and David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. I've already done videos talking about both of those books and going into detail with how much I love these. These were books that I was rereading to see, are they still my favorites? And these 2 are definitely still my favorites. These 2 are right at the top of my list of favorite classics. With North and South, I just read it from the physical copy that I have, but with David Copperfield, I listened to the audiobook narrated by Richard Armitage. Now, this created kind of a weird crossroads in my brain, because in the BBC miniseries adaptation of North and South, John Thornton is played by Richard Armitage. And then I had Richard Armitage in my head reading David Copperfield to me. So it was like this weird kind of strange Dickens Gaskell inception or something. Like in my brain, it was John Thornton who was reading David Copperfield out loud. So I had this whole fantasy going of like me and John Thornton just sitting by the fireside in the evenings, and he's reading aloud from the latest Dickens novel. As if that wasn't enough for a weird Dickens kind of inception going on, I also did a Dickens puzzle. So while I was listening to the audiobook, I was doing the puzzle of the world of Dickens. So it was kind of fun to actually see the character of David Copperfield in the puzzle while I'm listening to the audiobook of David Copperfield. I really enjoyed doing this puzzle. It was so much fun, and it was really cool to recognize all the different characters from A Christmas Carol and the ghosts, and characters from Bleak House and from Dombey and Son, and just all of those wonderful Dickens stories that we love. And they're brought to life in this beautiful artwork in this puzzle that was so much fun to do. So there was like this weird overlap with a lot of Victorian stuff that I was doing, and it was just so perfect. It was like this amazing whirlwind of Victorianness that just kind of took over my life for a while. I also finished up reading The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. That doesn't technically count for Victober since Dumas is not a Victorian English author, but I was still finishing up reading it from the previous month. I've already done another video all about my thoughts about Count of Monte Cristo. It is definitely one of my favorite classics, and I really enjoyed rereading it this time. So be sure to go over and check out that video to see all my thoughts about Count of Monte Cristo. The rest of the books in this video are books that I received for free from a publisher in exchange for a free and honest review. The other classic that I read was an adaptation of The Little Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen. So most of the story is exactly the way that Hans Christian Andersen wrote it, but the ending was changed slightly, and a little bit of it was kind of rewritten in different places. So it's not, I don't know that I would call it a retelling. It's just a slightly edited and slightly changed adaptation of it. The illustrations were really beautiful in this one, and I really liked the ending. I'm not going to spoil it for anybody, but they did change the ending slightly and just made it a little more hopeful. So if you know the original ending of The Little Mermaid and you're like, oh, I never liked that, then you might like this one much better. I gave that 5 stars. Absolutely fabulous. I read a really cool book called The Welsh Monsters and Mythical Beasts, a guide to the legendary creatures from Celtic Welsh myth and legend. This is so cool. I love hearing about legends and mythical creatures, and this was just really, really beautiful. Beautiful illustrations, and it was really cool that you get to learn all these different Welsh names for stuff. There is a pronunciation guide, and I had a lot of fun trying to wrap my mouth around all these different Welsh names. It was so cool to be able to dive into that culture and that language and just learn something new. This book talks about elves and fairies and dragons and strange beasts and griffins and ghostly spirits. Some creatures are benevolent, some creatures are dangerous, and some are just wild and mysterious. The artwork is so absolutely gorgeous. Just these lovely, delicate lines. And whether it's a beautiful fairy or a horrifying monster, the artist really captures the grotesqueness and the beauty in both. That one is 5 stars, so fabulous. I read the sci-fi novel, The Never-Ending End of the World. At the end of the world, Coco is left all alone in New York City. All around her, people are trapped in their own individual little bubbles of time. They're stuck in a time loop, just endlessly repeating the same task over and over. And then their time loop resets and they do it again. After years of surviving alone, Coco begins to wonder if there might be other people like her who are free from the time loops. This book broke my brain, and it broke my heart, and then it broke my brain again. I was completely hooked from the very first page, and it was just a wild roller coaster of emotions right up to the last page. The characters are very real, very intense. They go through some terrible ordeals and losses, but there's a lot of joy and laughter in there as well. The coolest thing was seeing how Coco grows and changes, because the book spans about 38 years. She really changes into a completely different person from the scared little girl that we met at the beginning. It was very interesting to see how the world building kept growing. In the beginning, that world is very small. It's just Coco, and she's just trying to survive. We start out with this very small view of the world, just one person. And then the world keeps expanding and getting bigger, and we discover more and more about what is going on as Coco begins to meet people. But the bigger that world gets, the more mysteries there are, the more problems there are, the more obstacles. The writing was really brilliant at giving us this big picture of the whole world is ending, but also taking the time to notice the little details of these characters' everyday lives. The stakes feel even bigger because they stop to appreciate the little things in life. And so the end of the world feels even more epic when you take a moment to just be grateful for every breath. I loved that this book explores a lot of really deep themes, like just the meaning of life and family and what it means to love someone. However, there is quite a lot of profanity in here, and it's a testament to how good the book was, because I could not stop reading even though the profanity really bothered me. But I was just so hooked. I had to keep reading even though that really annoyed me. The narrative structure is just unlike anything I have ever seen, ever. It was told in 4 big sections, alternating between 2 different characters' POVs. And then within their sections, we get these first-person excerpts from their diary, and then the other chapters are told in a third-person narrative, but still focusing on that character from their point of view. But the diary parts were usually in past tense, and then the regular chapters were in present tense. Just wow. I mean, the style was jumping around a lot, and yet it felt cohesive and intentional, and it made sense. It was really well done. I'm kind of in awe at how this author managed to take all of that and still tell a coherent story. I do not care for present tense, and I do not like head hopping between different POVs, and yet it all just fit together so well. It just worked. And I really appreciated that it was well organized and everything was consistent within that system. This is definitely one of those books where you just keep thinking about it for days, for weeks afterward. I actually got so immersed in this story that I had a dream that I was a character in the story. If it had not been for the profanity, this would have been a 5-star book, but as it was, I gave it 4 stars. I also read the first 2 books in the Woodwalkers series, starting with Carrig's transformation. Carrig is a shapeshifter. He can become a puma or a human, and he can go back and forth between those 2 different forms. But his family has always lived as pumas, as mountain lions. They rarely change into their human form. But Carrig decides to leave his family and start a new life as a human. But being a human is more difficult than he thought it would be. He finds it complicated to navigate through the nuances of human behavior and customs. So Carrig begins to attend a special school just for shapeshifters, and he makes enemies and friends along the way. I really loved this imaginative book. It's kind of interesting to see the world of humans through the eyes of a character who has spent most of their life as an animal. I really loved the school setting and the different shapeshifter characters. It was really interesting to see how the different shapeshifter characters interact based on what their animal form is, whether prey or predator. Their personalities reflect characteristics of their animal form. I just found this so interesting, so imaginative. I loved Carrig's character. I loved the adventurous plot. I gave that first book 4 stars and immediately dove into the second book, A Dangerous Friendship. In the second book, Carrig has to face his enemies, and he begins to wonder who at the school can he really trust? Who is going to be an ally, a friend that will really stand with him through tough times? He has a few good friends that he knows he can trust, but he finds an unexpected ally within the wolf pack. Now, typically the wolves are the school bullies, but one of the wolves seems to befriend Carrig, but he's just not sure if he can really trust her. Now, in the first book, they have all these school assignments where they have to learn about how to deal with difficult situations as a human or weird situations as an animal. But in this second book, their lessons take on a much more practical approach. It's like in the first book, their schoolwork was more just learning the theory of things, and now they're actually having to put those things into practice, which means that they get into a lot of mischief and trouble, and it was really, really fun. I gave this second book 4 stars as well, and I begged the publisher to send me the third book, and so I'm gonna be reading that this month. I am absolutely hooked on this series, and I just love it so much. There are a lot more books in the series, but they haven't been translated yet. I think only the first 3 books so far have been translated into English, and so I'm just waiting and waiting for the rest of them to be translated. These are a lot of fun. The 3 children's picture books that I read in October were Tree Whispers, Letters in Charcoal, and Merlina and the Magical Mishap. I gave all of those 5 stars, just so adorable. And those are all the books that I read in October. Please leave a comment and let me know what was your favorite book that you read this past month. Did you participate in Victober? And if so, what is one of your favorite Victorian classics? Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and remember, the right book in the right hands at the right time can change the world.